Hey Alana, this is Cassie Carricker from Partners in Learning. I'll be on here today helping field questions for you.
Okay, wonderful. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so
Um,
much for giving your time for us.
of course. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. It's been a while since I've given a training. So, um, and let me know. I guess I'll wait till 1 to get started. And I'm going to be sharing some videos today. And I might just need your help in remembering to pause the recording before I show a video because I am allowed to share them. I have permission, just not for them to then be uploaded to YouTube with our clients from Autism Society. So,
Okay, no problem.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, you think it's okay to go ahead and get started now, or should we wait a few minutes?
I
Think
think
it's fine. Thank you.
Okay, beautiful. Well, let me introduce myself. I am Alana Ianello, and I am a board certified behavior analyst, and I work for the Autism Society of North Carolina. And today I've been asked to come and talk to everyone about promoting communication and social engagement in young learners with autism. I was really hoping that by this time this year, we would be not having to meet virtually, but here we are. So hopefully I don't have any technological issues. But so typically I would love to know who is in the training, whether you're providers, teachers, speech language therapists, parents. So if you don't mind, maybe just putting that in the chat box, and then maybe you could let me know who we have in the training today while I tell you a little bit about myself. So I was just sure that in life I was going to be a mental health therapist. So I went to school for psychology, and in college, I began working with children with autism, and that was the beginning of the end. I found my passion. So shortly after finishing my degree in psychology, I went and began teaching in a self-contained classroom for children with autism. That was when North Carolina allowed lateral entry teachers. So then I had 3 years to get my teaching license, and then went on to do my master's in special education. And so I worked in a self-contained classroom in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools for 5 years before joining their central office autism team, where I supported half the schools in the district. Children with autism, supported the teachers and service providers to support kiddos on the spectrum. And while I was in that job, then decided to go back and get my certification as a behavior analyst. And so I've been working for the Autism Society of North Carolina for the last 5 years, and I absolutely love it. So we do all in-home therapy. We provide lifelong intervention. So I have had kiddos as young as 15 months, and currently my oldest client is 20. So it's always interesting. Every day is different, but it's been a very rewarding experience. So I'm just going to take a peek at the chat right now. So great. We've got some people from the Department of Human Services, toddler teachers and teachers. Great. Wonderful. Okay, awesome. This is all good news. I like to just get a feel for who I'm talking to. So thank you for sharing that info. Let's see. Uh-oh, now this won't let my slide advance. There we go. So today I really want to talk about why play is important. When we come in contact with kiddos with autism, and we see that they have so many different needs, right? Which can manifest in behavioral challenges or challenges to daily living skills. Why should we concentrate on play? And how does social engagement through play facilitate communication and social engagement? And then how do I teach a child with autism to play when they don't seem to have those typical interests in either peer engagement or what we might consider typical toys? So, how do I go about this? So we're briefly going to outline the core features of autism that sort of inhibit those social and communication skills as it relates to play. I always think it's really important to review those core deficits because I think we need to know the why behind we're doing what we're doing. We're going to talk about the importance of play and then strategies that professionals and caregivers can use to promote that social engagement. So I don't know if you guys have heard the saying, but I find myself saying this all the time, that if you've met one person with autism, you have truly just met one person with autism. We all know that it's a spectrum disorder, and that the strengths and deficits can manifest in many different ways, in many different facets of the child. And then they can, the deficits can really be on a sliding scale. So, while all of these kids are different, there are a lot of these similarities in those deficits, and as well as similarities in interventions that we can put in place to support these children. So I'm hopeful that my videos will work. I'm going to stop or pause recording real quick.
Yes, we could.
Okay, great. So you might see some of this behavior of dumping toys, sort of sifting through it, some of that stereotypy or self-stimulatory behavior of the finger flicking. You can hear that there's a lot of kids, talking and playing and teachers talking in the background, but this kid really is not at this point interested or engaging with any of that other play. So this is pretty typical of, certain kids that we see on the spectrum. So how do we enter that world? So differences in communication and social interactions. Young kiddos with autism may have little or no speech, or they may have speech, but just not be able to use that language functionally to get their needs met. They may have interest in the physical environment. I'm going to use the term sort of like that object focused versus interest in any sort of social interactions. They may have poorly integrated nonverbal behaviors. So maybe that pointing, reading social cues, and then limited sharing of affect, emotions, and interests. So you may not see sort of, if a kiddo with autism is enjoying something, you may start to see some of that excited finger flicking or some of that self-stimulatory behavior, which indicates their excitement or enjoyment. But it's not what caregivers and service providers are used to seeing, right? The smiles, the eye contact, sort of that back and forth reciprocity of interest. And that can be difficult. So one of the major deficits that we find in kiddos with autism is joint attention. And what is joint attention? So it's shared focus of two individuals on an object. So what does a typically developing kiddo, when they're outside and they hear an airplane go by, what do they typically do? They typically look up, they may point towards the sky, and then they may turn to a parent or a peer or a sibling to engage in that joint attention, right? To look at the caregiver, then look back up at the sky. And that brings that caregiver into the child's world. It shows them that not only am I looking up at the sky at the airplane, but I'm also referencing that caregiver to bring them into that interaction. And what that does for a caregiver is it lets the caregiver know that that's what the child's looking at. When they look back to caregiver, what does the caregiver do? They say, airplane, oh, the airplane's flying in the sky, right? So that gives the caregiver the cue to sort of narrate the world for the child and give them the language to connect to their environment. So it builds relationships between the caregiver and the child. And it also gives the caregiver a cue to give that language. So it builds language comprehension, production, and word learning. So if you have a child with autism, they often they might look at the object, but then they're not referencing the caregiver to sort of cue for that language for their environment. Kiddos with autism often have differences in flexibility and creativity in play. So if you've ever seen a child with autism play, they might line up their toys, right? They might love their toys, but only to put them, either categorize them or put them, sort them by color or line them up, instead of over here where you see He-Man on the castle and the bad guys are trying to get him and kick him off the castle, a really sort of well flushed out play scheme that is typically a deficit that we see in kids with autism. So how do we approach that to sort of build some of those functional play schemes in kids with autism? A lot of our kiddos may prefer to engage in that self-stimulatory behavior. So maybe I like my toys, but I line them up, or I like to spin them. And what that does for a child is, self-stimulatory behavior is often calming to a child. They enjoy it. They enjoy whatever consequence the spinning or the lining up provides for them. But what happens is when a child engages in the same behavior over and over, they're experiencing the same result in their environment. But when we're able to build in some functional play, and maybe we take that preferred item that we normally spin and we put it down the slide instead, we're teaching the child to experiment with their world, and doing something different with that preferred item provides a variety of consequences and results in their environment. So they learn, oh, things naturally go down the slide. And so it may help us develop new interests in these kids with autism. So I'm not saying that we need to be consistently interrupting self-stimulation in kids with autism, because it is what we're learning from adults with autism is that is a coping skill for many people. And we all engage in self-stimulation. I am trying really hard today not to twirl my hair. I am a compulsive hair twirler. It's something that keeps me focused. It's something that keeps me calm. I know a lot of people are nail pickers or foot tappers or pen tappers. So we all engage in self-stimulation, but it typically, when we have the social skills to realize what is an appropriate form of self-stimulation. So it can manifest very differently in kids with autism and be more pervasive in their lives. So some of the implications of these social deficits is, as I said, our kiddos may not respond to the social attempts in the way that typically developing children do, with that smile, laughter, eye contact. So they may show joy and excitement and happiness and interest in different ways. But what that does for caregivers and service providers and peers as well is that because we don't see that typical affect of enjoyment, oftentimes caregivers' behavior is essentially punished from future interactions, right? Because they're like, oh, I don't know, I didn't see him smile or laugh. So I guess he didn't like that. I'm not going to try to interact with him in the future, which then decreases opportunities for social learning for kids. So it's sort of this negative feedback loop that happens. But the positive is that pretend play skills are pivotal, and they lead children to learn later skills without requiring as much direct instruction if we can find ways to motivate and engage with the child through play. So oftentimes we see these restricted patterns of interest. This kid at the top here loves fans and will set them up all behind him. You can see that he's lined them up in the perfect line. So we might have that lack of variety and preferences, and maybe a lot of timidness towards even engaging with new items or activities. Our kiddos may have extensive knowledge on certain peak topics. That preoccupation with unusual items. Throughout my 18 years in this field, I have encountered some kiddos with some very, very interesting restricted interests, masking tape, spiders, ABCs, commercial air conditioners, ceiling fans. This may also then manifest, a lot of times our kids have extreme food selectivity and can be very problem eaters. So those restricted interests go into foods. I know kids that will only eat white foods or will only eat crunchy foods. So that rigidity can really manifest in all aspects of the kids' lives. And they may become really upset over minor changes. So that's where you see that rigidity in like needing the same schedule every single day, or needing to wear the same shirt or the same shorts, or preferring a specific type of shoe. So again, I mean, these are things that all of us do, right? They just are a little more pronounced in our kids with autism. So red flags for development would be no big smiles or other warm, joyful expressions by 6 months or thereafter. No sort of back and forth sharing of sounds, sort of that initial babbling that goes on with young babies, or the back and forth smiling or facial expressions by 9 months. No babbling by 12 months, no back and forth gestures such as pointing, showing, reaching, or waving by 12 months. No words by 16 months. No meaningful 2-word phrases. This does not include imitating or repeating phrases by 2 years of age. And then any loss of speech or babbling or social skills at any age. So why play? A lot of times, when I start with a new client, whether it be a young kiddo or an older learner, 8, 9, 10, a lot of times parents say to me, why does it seem like all your staff is doing is playing with my child? And really, that's what a lot of therapy and treatment should look like, right? Because best practices in early intervention realize that social motivation is sort of the gateway to being able to teach kids to learn from other people, right? Those joint activity routines, it builds reciprocity and sustained engagement with another person. When you go into a typical preschool class, all of the kids, yes, they're learning from the adults, but they're learning from watching other kids. What did, Joey do with this toy? Oh, I'm going to try that with this toy. Cool. I didn't know this toy could do that. So if we can build some of that social motivation and some of these early imitation skills, that's going to be a pivotal skill for that child for the rest of their lives. So play is so important. And what are some early intervention goals that can be targeted through play? So teaching those nonverbal natural gestures that serve a variety of functions, right? So requesting with intention, directing communication. So, if you've got a kid that can request a cookie and he is super motivated for cookies, but he's sitting in the corner of the room, not near anybody that can give him a cookie just saying cookie, 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 he's not directed his communication to the right person, right? So not only making those requests, but then also directing it to somebody to help meet those needs. Sharing interests, showing items. We also need our kids to be able to reject or terminate activities that are no longer fun for them. Responding to gestures such as pointing, eye gaze, to get that social information. Imitation, again, a huge skill deficit typically for kids with autism. And if they are not able to imitate, if we don't teach them to imitate, then they're not going to be able to learn from their peers. And then just following simple instructions in naturalistic contexts and in fun contexts that then are super positive for the kid. Oh, I follow this instruction. My mom or staff is super excited. And then it leads to reinforcement. So motivation is key. So we need to be essentially, when we're first starting to engage with kids with autism, we need to be a detective, right? What does he or she like to do when there's no demands in their world? What do they gravitate to? What items or activities do they like to do? What does he or she want? Then how can I figure out how to engage him or her around his preference? And then how can I become a means to get what he wants? So a lot of times, if, especially when I'm starting to work with a young kiddo, the mom will say, well, I really want him to play with trains. But in the time that I'm observing him, he's never gone near the trains. He doesn't care about the trains, but he's super into that swing in his room, right? So I'm not going to come in and start by placing demands for this kid to play with the train. If he's spending his free time in the swing, how can I start to enter his world and start to engage him on the swing? He clearly already likes that. So I might try to arrange a sensory-based or object-based routine that we can enjoy together. So how can I make this more fun with me than without me? So if kiddo is on his swing, maybe I find ways to help him engage in new ways on his swing, right? So maybe I take his swing and I twist it up and then let him spin out of it. Or maybe every time I sit on his bed and every time his swing comes back, I tickle his feet. So imitating things that the child already enjoys, and then trying to enter into that routine, making it more fun with me. Now, I'm going to keep saying this throughout my talk, but you're always going to watch for that child's affect, right? I want to know from mom or dad what things show that this kid is enjoying that activity. And I'm always going to watch his or her affect. And when they're clearly no longer enjoying it, I'm going to bail on the play routine because I do not want to make myself aversive and I don't want to make play aversive. So I'm going to remember to pause recording again. So we figured out that he thought it was super funny when we pretended to be scared of the Jack in the Box, right? So first he's sort of playing with it by himself. Then I pretended to be scared. And then what did he do? He grabbed the next one. And when I asked for a turn, he gave me a turn. So that's starting that reciprocity, that back and forth interaction through play. And then he grabbed another one and turned to my staff who was recording and wanted to scare her, right? So then I'm able to prompt communication, tell Miss Kina you want to scare her. And so now we've got a third person engaged in this joint attention activity. And what I always try to do is I always try to pair any sort of reinforcement then with physical social reinforcement that I know the child enjoys. So this kid loves tickles. So not only do I pretend to be scared, but then I reach in, tickle him. So I'm also teaching him like, I'm fun when I'm scared, but then I'll also provide additional social reinforcement for you. So this is just one way. And I know that this is an older guy, but it was the best video example that I had of engaging in that self-stimulatory play. Oops. So we always want to look for and reinforce communication behaviors. And I think this is so important, especially as you start with those really little guys, right? Teaching them that looking towards a caregiver, looking towards a teacher, approaching, reaching, pointing for something, showing something. We want to reinforce those really early signs of communication. Because once we then teach the child that if I approach or I take the hand of a caregiver to something that I need, if I point to something, then this person is going to help me get my needs met, right? I can, we gotta start where we can. So if I have to start by getting you the Jack in the Box off the table that you can't reach, cool. That means that Miss Alana is going to mediate cool things for me, and I like her. And so all of these early communication behaviors come before that verbal language or any sort of picture communication exchange or sign language. So we want to be on the lookout and reinforcing those early communication behaviors. Then we also want to set up the environment to promote communication. So like I said, putting those fun items up high, as long as the child sees you put them up high, putting them into containers. I am really well known for putting some super awesome items that I know a kid loves into a Tupperware that they are going to need help to open, or a Ziploc bag that they can see the item, but they can't get to it without bringing it to me and either handing it to me, making eye contact with me. So those early communication requests for help. And then we want to reinforce. And what we're going to do is, even if the kid does not have those early vocal responses to be able to say help, once they hand it to me, I'm going to model that, right? I'm not going to require that they say it at that time, but they hand it to me. I say, oh, help. And then I open it for them, give them the item. So we want to contrive all of these situations. We also want to, once we start teaching these skills, then we want to insert sort of pauses and excited, expectant looks. My go-to when I start working with a really young kid with autism is bubbles. If they're motivated for bubbles or balloons, is to start by pulling out those bubbles and just providing free access to the bubbles. So blowing a ton of bubbles, right? Until the kid's super into it. And then I put the bubble wand back in, I'm holding it here. And once they look at me or reach for the item, then I'm gonna pull it out and blow more bubbles, right? I'm reinforcing those really early communication requests. And then I might, stop and pull the bubble wand out and do the excited, expected look, like, and wait for the child to reach for it. And then pause and prompt if needed, right? It's easier if you've got two people there, but with my staff, for a kid that's initially learning to reach for or point to an item, I'm gonna have the staff, then I'm gonna pause and wait. And then I might have my staff prompt through the point or the reach for the item. And then I'm gonna immediately honor the request. We want to teach our kids that these early communication behaviors have power over their environment. It's got to be incredibly frustrating. Oftentimes, kids with autism have all of the things going on up here, but not being able to communicate it or have power over your environment has got to be incredibly frustrating. And if we don't teach a lot of the social engagement and communication responses early on, that's when you start to see some of that challenging behavior come out. And I get it. So this is one of my little guys that we started with when he was 3. But anytime, so now that you know what the child wants, right? This kid loves cars, super into cars. Then I'm going to start putting them into containers that he can't get to. We've already built rapport, okay? I didn't come in and initially start taking his stuff and putting it in containers that he couldn't get to. We've been working together for probably 2 months at this time. We have a lot of trust. We have a lot of therapeutic rapport. But now I'm starting to put his preferred toys into containers that he can't get to. And so I'm narrating his environment for him.
Did you want to pause the recording?
Oh, gosh, thank you so much. I knew I was going to forget. Zoom. Okay, so sorry you have to hear my super annoying, excited voice with this kid. But what I'm doing is initially I'm prompting this kid to say help. Initially, we were just having him make the sound for help. Then we shaped it into help. But initially I'm prompting those responses, and then I'm starting to require more and more of him. And in the last trial, I put it in and I prompted with the sound and he said help then. So I see that people are, oh, you couldn't hear the video? Oh no. Well, then on there, I'm sorry, guys. Have you not been able to hear all the videos? Oh, I'm sorry. But anyway, the point is starting to put those items, those preferred items, in contrived situations where the kid is going to need help. Sensory social routines are a big one for our kids with autism. And it's typically where I start with kids. So basic sensory social routines would be tickles, songs with finger play. So that would be, Itsy Bitsy Spider, open, shut them, silly noises. That's typically how I teach children to respond to their name. That's a really difficult one for our kids with autism, to respond to their name. And so what I typically do is call the child's name. If they don't look, I make a silly sound like a raspberry or a whistle. And then when they look, I reinforce and tickle, good job looking. So often, we say kids' names all day, right? And it's usually followed by something, either a demand that the kid doesn't want to do or to stop doing something. So kids are used to hearing their names all day, and typically they're not followed by fun, awesome things, right? So they just learn, whoa, it's way easier to just not respond to my name. So silly noises is typically how I teach a kid initially to start responding to their name. But chase, spinning on a swing, water play and sink if you have a water kid, bubbles, pulling kids around on a blanket, blowing up a balloon and releasing, or making the silly sound where you just pull it a little bit and it makes that high-pitched squeak, bouncing and jumping. This is usually where I start with my kids when they're super young. And it's all about finding the right starting point. So first we want to enter with the child's preferred activities, right? And we want to start with building up their tolerance for even having us in the presence of all their preferred things. This is why a lot of times it's difficult for kids with autism to want to interact with other kids. And what we find a lot of times is that kids with autism prefer adult presence because we're more predictable, right? So if you've got a kid that's super into ABCs and they've got their whole line of ABCs, what's another 3-year-old going to do? They're probably going to come in and walk through the line or pick up some of their toys in the ABC line. And that is super stressful for a kid that has really rigid play skills. So we want to be trustworthy, right? When we're first starting to enter this kid's world. So I'm not going to come in and start messing up this kid's line or touching stuff in his line. We're not going to make these drastic changes. We might just come in and narrate what they're doing. Oh, I see that you chose alligator for A, right? Oh, ball is for B. We may offer help to try to find an item, that starts with that specific letter, or help them find a letter to go into their line. We may imitate their play, but we're not going to place demands initially. We do not want to make play aversive. With one of my little guys that loves ABCs, what I started with was bringing my own set of ABCs, right? And next to him in the room, I was just doing some parallel play. As he would put the A in line, I would put the A in my line. And then we moved to where he would put the A, I would find a toy that began with the letter A, put it underneath his A. Then with B, I would find a ball to put under B. So I wasn't interfering a lot. It was more parallel play until he built up tolerance for me being in his play scheme. And then you begin to gradually take control or mediate those preferred items, right? So then I might keep a bucket of the items, and as he's building his line, he has to look to me for an item to put under his B that starts with B, or, as he gains verbal language, he might say B, or ball, or boy. So then we're always, again, watching for that feedback. Are they enjoying it? Are they then sort of walking out of the room or eloping from the play scheme? Or are they starting to show signs that they are no longer enjoying it? They're starting to get ticked off. Then we're gonna bail. We're gonna leave it, right? We want to always leave on that positive note, so that the next day they're going to want to come back and interact with us. So we just want to make subtle modifications and allow the activity to still be guided by the child. You want to, again, look for that shared affect and engagement. You want to slowly work towards the back and forth with the child. Playfully modify the routine, monitoring their enjoyment with it. So this is the same kiddo. When we started with him, his preferred way to play was to line up all of his cars. And I was not about to come in. This was a kiddo that when we started in 2-hour sessions, about an hour and 45 minutes of it, and initially when we started, was tantrum behavior. And we weren't placing a lot of demands. He didn't know what was happening in his environment. He was in a new space, new people in his space. But so where do we start to enter this play scheme without upsetting him? And then what might we want to work towards long-term? So what can I add to the mix? How can I change it up just a little bit to work towards some variety with this kid and with his play scheme? So the way that we started with him was just by buying what you can see underneath here, the rug underneath that's got the road on it. It's got some stoplights, so we just started by putting that underneath where he was playing with his toys or with his cars. And we let him line them up on there. And then we slowly shaped it to lining them up on the road. And then we interjected the track that you see here, right? And then we'd slowly start to move the cars along on the track. They were still in a line, right? We weren't interrupting that too much. So this is not going to be a super fast process with a lot of kids. But then this is about a year into services with this little guy. Oh, let me pause recording. Zoom recording here. So yeah, clearly I was this took us a long time to work up to where I could violate his play routine this much by sawing away the track. But you can see then how many different consequences he's getting from that play, right? We're racing the cars around the track, so we're working on faster and slower, and we're crashing the cars. And then we're using the saw and the drill to put the track back together. So this took a lot for him to, I always think about this like a rubber band, right? If you leave a rubber band, it's going to stay in that small way. And eventually it's going to get so old that it's going to crack when you try to stretch it, right? But if you continually stretch and slowly stretch a rubber band, eventually it's gonna become more flexible, right? So that's what we're trying to teach our kids. And I did, and he was super angry with me after I cut the second piece of track, and he let me know. He was pretty ticked off. But yeah, that's what it's about, monitoring the kids' affect for the activity. So a lot of times what I do too then is pair these toys with new actions, new themes, or introduce new toys with preferred activities. So if a kiddo is a kid that loves to self-stimulate on a string. We have a lot of string kids that, wiggle it back and forth and just like to watch it, or like the way it feels in their fingers. Taking that string, maybe not their most preferred string, maybe your own string, but swirling it in washable paint, right? So then you're adding sort of a sensory routine and you're adding a new material, you're adding paint to that. Or if the child loves chase or hide and seek, then maybe you introduce a stuffed bear that also chases the child with you, right? And then the more things that we do with the child that he already loves, introducing a new toy, then that toy gains reinforcing value. If the child loves to sift through a rice table, maybe we add dinosaurs in and bury them under the rice, and then we have to dig for the dinosaurs. If they love water beads, introducing the water beads into a pretend kitchen. At snack time, if you want to introduce a new stuffed animal, maybe the toy animal comes and sits with you and eats snack with you. They love Thomas. Maybe Thomas is sick and needs to go to the doctor, and then you can introduce a doctor kit into some play with Thomas, or Elsa and her friends cooking in the kitchen. So I also always say, and all of my clients' parents can tell you this, when I enter a session, I literally leave my self-respect at the door. I will do anything that is more ridiculous than the last thing I did to see what I can do to engage a child on the spectrum. So you've got to be enthusiastic. It's our job to sell the child on how fun the activity is. And we want to build in suspense and anticipation for those social interactions. So if I've got a kid that loves tickles, I'm going to tickle, tickle, tickle. And then I'm going to like pull my hands back and have an anticipatory look on my face and wait for the child to either look at me, if that's the communication response we're looking for, or reach for my hands, or say tickle, whatever communication response we're working for. And it is trial and error. I will think at night about the coolest play routine that I can do with my kid the next day, and it may just tank. And that's okay. And what works on Monday may not work on Tuesday. But don't be afraid to be silly. I always say this when I'm hiring staff. I'm like, I can teach you all day about the teaching protocols, but I cannot teach someone to be fun and silly and just leave their self-respect at the door. So when motivation is present, when you are teaching these non-vocal communication skills, you want to model the gesture or movement in the moment. You may help them gesture or prompt that gesture. So you may need some partial physical prompting. If a model prompt is not working, then you want to begin to increase your wait time to see if the child will begin to engage in that gesture on their own. but lots and lots of practice with providing wait time. Our kids have difficulty processing information. So a lot of times you might wait for what feels like a really awkward amount of time. And then the kid might point, right? So you want to sort of gauge how long you need to wait. And then you want to be able to fade your prompts out so the child is doing it more and more independently. So again, we've talked about these really early fundamental communication targets, and I'm gonna shout out a book that I use at the end of this presentation that I really recommend any preschool teacher, any parent that has a young person with autism in their home be looking at it. It's a really great assessment and tool. So I won't forget to shout that out. But then increasing vocal communication. If you have a kiddo that is doing some babbling back and forth, that's typically where I start for a kid that has not had any history of vocal communication. Any sort of vocal sounds they make, I'll typically imitate it. And then the child will sort of look at me like I'm crazy. And then we do some fun activity, right? Like I tickle, or, we hug, or we do something fun that they love. So they are starting to learn that sort of back and forth of babbling of vocal sounds. We want to sort of watch for signs of motivation and then pause. You might model the beginning sound. If you're working with bubbles, I might say, bup, 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 bup. Initially, I'm just modeling that, right? I'm not requiring that the child do that sound, but I may say but every time I blow bubbles. You want to honor any attempts by providing that reinforcement and then pairing it with social praise. If they initiate the communication on their own, and this sort of goes for any social or communication attempt, you want to give them more of the item or more time with the item. You want to provide more reward for any independent or spontaneous communication that a kiddo gives. And then you want to practice frequently with naturalistic repetition and provide choices whenever possible. So typically what I do with my kiddos, once I know things that they're interested in, I'll use just a visual choice board. And you'll have to sort of gauge what symbolic level your kiddo is on. A lot of my kiddos need actual picture, like photographs of them engaged in a particular activity. This might be for a kid that has a little bit higher level of symbolic understanding. But that can provide the child choice if they don't have the vocal language to be able to choose what they want. The great thing is with technology now, we can technology is just amazing and has really opened up a world of interaction and communication for our kids with autism. But today, do you want goldfish or crackers? Give them an opportunity to make a choice for what they want. And when you're looking at what I know a lot of parents would, of course, prefer vocal communication with their kids, but a lot of times some early sign language or some early picture exchange communication systems are actually wonderful at facilitating communication. And all of the research shows that this does not limit vocal communication. A lot of times this actually promotes vocal communication. So I've worked with a lot of parents that have said, I don't want my child to rely on a picture exchange communication system. But what the research shows is that it honestly typically promotes vocal communication. So them learning that if I pull off Play-Doh picture, exchange it, I get Play-Doh. This gives me power over my environment. It helps them understand more concretely what vocal communication could do for them. Same with early sign language. Typically, what we're seeing is that it promotes vocal communication. So a lot of times, I'll hear in IEP meetings or with other service providers, like, oh, well, he receives speech twice a week for 30 minutes. First we work, then we play, but we don't want to compartmentalize communication, right? We want to teach the child to communicate for the things that they are motivated for, right? That is going to be the quickest way that we're going to build language, whether it's early language communication responses, vocal language, picture exchange communication. If they're requesting things like cookies or tickles or iPad that they really want, we're going to gain language so much quicker than if we're teaching them to request for a turn to color with blue if they don't really care about coloring. So we learn through work and play. So just a reminder, keys to success. We want to identify the right starting point. We want to find motivation and make it fun. We want that repeated practice. We want to start with help and prompts, but then fade these out over time so that the child becomes more and more spontaneous and independent with their responding. Layer on and add carefully. And then also, I really encourage you, if you're teachers, service providers, to teach parents about the successes that you've experienced. Encourage parents to come in if you're having a lot of success in play with your child or with social engagement or communication. Ask your parents to come in and observe or take a video so you can show them what's working, because our kids don't generalize easily. So something they might be able to do at school, they may not immediately take that skill and be using it in the home setting or in another setting. So teach parents about what you're doing. And same if you're a parent, teach your service providers and teachers about what you're doing that works. Parents are the expert. So play is often talked about as a relief from serious learning, but for children, play is serious learning. Play is really the work of childhood. And, keep in mind that kids with autism are a child first. First and foremost, they are a person. So I just I know we're running really short on time, and I want to have a chance for anyone to ask questions. Let me see if I can find the book that I want to tell you guys about. If you're a service provider, I really highly recommend the Early Start Denver model for young children with autism. It has a really amazing assessment in here, and it's got a great description of how to really build these play skills, test these play skills, and sort of the building blocks and where to go, especially if you're writing IEPs, you're writing treatment plans. It's also got a really nice sister resource that is the parent book. So typically what I do when I start with a really young kid is I have the parents and I read the parent guide together. So, I'll give them homework, we'll read the first chapter together, and then we'll get together the next week and discuss it. And I've found it to be incredibly helpful for parents, and to give them sort of some of that power and encouragement to interact with their kids. If you ever need support from the Autism Society, we have amazing ladies called Autism Resource Specialists who are all parents of individuals on the spectrum. They are able to, if you are a parent or working with a parent that has recently gotten a diagnosis for their child, or they have an older child, they will walk through getting access to all sorts of services. They will attend IEP meetings with parents. They'll attend evaluations with parents. And the fact that they have walked this journey is such a gift to parents in my experience. We have a lot of online resources. We've got webinars, toolkits, blogs, social narratives, all sorts of stuff on keeping your kids safe. We've also got multiple workshops, some for younger kiddos, but it's for parents after they get the diagnosis, how to get answers, get help, and get going. And then we have one for people that are diagnosed a little bit later. So that's all on our website. And here's the number if you want to call to get support from us, but anyway, I want to open it up to questions. I know we're running a little short on time. I'm sorry, I'm a talker, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Alana, thank you so much. This was a wonderful, comprehensive presentation. I could learn more all day long, every day. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
And what I will do is I will share Alana's email. If you are interested in more information, if you can just reach out to me, my email is in the Zoom links, and I'll be happy to get you connected with Alana at the Autism Society.
Thank you, Amy.
All right. I'm not seeing any additional questions. Nope, I don't see any questions. So I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. And y'all have a great weekend.
All right. Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.